What happens when justice takes decades to deliver? When a crime so horrific shakes the foundation of a community, yet the person responsible for that crime remains in the legal system for years, even decades, before facing their ultimate fate? In November 2025, 3 men who had long awaited their final moments on death row were finally held accountable for their actions. But with each passing year, the question looms larger. Does the delay in justice diminish its impact? These are not just stories of crime and punishment. They are tales of broken lives, shattered families, and a justice system that moves so slowly, it becomes a painful reminder of what happens when the wheels of justice grind to a halt. Today, we'll walk through the stories of these 3 men, convicted of heinous crimes that tore apart families and communities. From a brutal child murder in Florida to a rampage of violence across rural South Carolina, and a senseless killing in a Florida convenience store, we'll uncover the details of these crimes, the exhaustive investigations that followed, the legal battles that delayed justice for decades, and the moment when the final sentences were carried out. Their last meals, their final words. These are the final chapters of their stories. But there are lingering questions. Was justice served, or was it too late to matter? Hey there, I'm glad you're here. Before we start, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let us know in the comments if you believe the death penalty is an effective form of justice. What are your thoughts on delayed justice and the moral implications of the death penalty? Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? If you won't subscribe, kindly let us know why in the comment section below. Your feedback matters, and we'd love to hear from you. Imagine being the family of a 6-year-old girl, finding out that the man who took her life waited 46 years to face justice. Bryan Frederick Jennings, who murdered Rebecca Kunach in 1979, was allowed to drag out his sentence through endless appeals and legal battles. In the meantime, Rebecca's family lived with the agony of not knowing when, or even if, they would ever see justice. This is the case that shook Brevard County, Florida, and it would take almost 5 decades before the state finally closed the book on Rebecca Kunach's murder. It was a warm May night in 1979 when 6-year-old Rebecca Kunach fell asleep in her bed. In Brevard County, Florida, just outside the quiet town of Cocoa, the Kunach family's world was about to be shattered. Bryan Jennings, a 20-year-old Marine who had returned home on leave, had spent the evening drinking. The alcohol coursing through his veins would fuel the horrific crime he was about to commit. Rebecca, innocent and unaware, was lying peacefully in her bed. Jennings broke into the Kunach home in the dead of night, snatched Rebecca from her bed, and with her small body in tow, drove her to a nearby canal. It was here, in the darkness of a secluded area, that Jennings violently assaulted and murdered the helpless child. The crime was brutal and cold-hearted. He struck Rebecca before ultimately drowning her in the canal. Her body was discovered hours later, and the community of Brevard County was forever altered by the unspeakable act. For Jennings, the act was one of senseless violence. He showed no remorse for what he had done. Even in the moments after his arrest, Jennings seemed unmoved by the pain he had caused. For Rebecca's family, the loss was beyond comprehension. A bright, innocent life snatched away, leaving behind only grief and unanswered questions. As the police began their investigation, the case unfolded quickly. Witnesses had seen a figure matching Jennings' description near the crime scene, and physical evidence, such as fingerprints found on Rebecca's bedroom window and a footprint near the canal, pointed directly to him. The evidence was compelling, and Jennings was arrested soon after the murder. Despite initially confessing to the crime, Jennings' confession was ruled inadmissible by the court. The reasons for this decision were tied to legal technicalities and disputes over whether Jennings' rights had been violated during the interrogation. For the investigators, this ruling meant the fight for justice was far from over. Although his confession was dismissed, Jennings could not escape the mounting evidence. The case, which had captivated Brevard County, soon became one of the most high-profile criminal cases of the 1970s. Jennings was officially charged with Rebecca's murder, and his trial was set in motion. Jennings was convicted of murder and sentenced to death in the early 1980s. However, the case quickly became a symbol of the deeply flawed and often delayed process of justice in America's death penalty system. What followed was a long and drawn-out legal battle that spanned nearly 5 decades. Jennings' defense team argued that his confession had been improperly obtained and that he was mentally unfit to be executed. Over the years, his legal team filed appeal after appeal, each one stalling the execution further. Despite the undeniable horror of his crime, Jennings' case became a battleground for debates surrounding the fairness of the death penalty and the lengthy delays in carrying out sentences. Through the years, Rebecca Kunak's family was forced to endure the pain of watching Jennings' case cycle through the courts. Each delay pushing the possibility of justice further out of reach. Every year, as Jennings filed another appeal, the family had to relive the trauma of their daughter's murder. For them, the legal system had failed to provide the swift justice they had hoped for. Jennings' case became a focal point for those who questioned the efficacy and morality of the death penalty. Was it right for a man like Jennings, convicted of such a heinous crime, to sit on death row for decades? Did his long wait for execution mean that justice was being served, or was it another example of a broken system? The execution of Bryan Jennings on November 13th, 2025, marked the end of a nearly 5-decade-long legal battle. After 46 years of appeals, procedural delays, and legal wrangling, the day had finally arrived for Jennings to face the ultimate consequence for his crime. He was transported to Florida State Prison in Stark, where his execution by lethal injection would bring closure to Rebecca Kunak's family, but leave many others questioning the fairness of such a lengthy process. Jennings was served a final meal of a cheeseburger, fries, and a soda, a stark contrast to the brutality of his crime. When asked if he had any final words, Jennings simply responded with a cold, emotionless no. No apology, no expression of remorse. Just a quiet refusal to speak. At 6:20 p.m., the execution began. The lethal injection flowed into Jennings' body, and after several moments of visible spasms, he was pronounced dead at 6:30 p.m. The long journey for justice had reached its final conclusion, but the questions lingered. Was justice truly served, Or had the long delay in carrying out the sentence made the very concept of justice seem irrelevant? After 46 years of waiting, was Jennings' execution truly justice? Or did the prolonged legal battles and delays ultimately diminish its meaning? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think justice delayed is justice denied? Don't forget to subscribe for more gripping true crime cases like this one. After 46 years of legal battles, Bryan Jennings was finally executed, bringing a long and painful chapter to an end. The case of Jennings raised haunting questions. Was justice truly served, or did the decades of delay tarnish its meaning? His execution closed the book on a case that had taken far too long to reach its conclusion. But what happens when the justice system moves even slower, and a man is given 17 years to fight against the inevitable? What happens when a man's violent spree leaves not just one victim, but 3? And what role does a person's troubled past play in their ultimate fate? Let's turn the page to the next story. The small rural towns of South Carolina were not prepared for the terror that would soon grip them. It was October 9th, 2004, when Corey Bryant, a man with a troubled past, would begin a killing spree that would leave a deep scar on Sumter County. What started as a seemingly random act of violence would soon spiral into an unpredictable rampage. 3 murders, 2 states of terror, and a chilling message left behind. Bryant's first victim was Clifton Gay, a man who had been Bryant's friend, at least until that fateful day. The two had spent hours together earlier that evening, drinking and reminiscing, seemingly unaware of the darkness that was slowly consuming Bryant. As they sat talking, Bryant's behavior became erratic. He grew quieter, distant, his movements unnatural. Without warning, he pulled a gun from his waistband and shot Gay in the head. Gay fell to the ground, lifeless before he could even comprehend what had just happened. But Bryant didn't stop there. He rifled through Gay's belongings, taking what he could, including a few $100s and personal items. Then, as if to erase all trace of his crime, Bryant set fire to Gay's trailer. The flames devoured everything. It was as if he wanted to burn the evidence, not just of his crime, but of the life that had once been there. As the fire roared through the night, Bryant walked away from the scene, leaving the remains of his friend behind. He didn't feel the weight of his actions. He simply moved on, as if it had all been some twisted necessity. But this wouldn't be the last victim he would claim. The next few days would only escalate the violence. 2 days later, Bryant's rage would find another target. Willard Tychon, a retired Air Force sergeant, was just minding his business on October 11th, 2004, living alone in his quiet home. He had no idea that the young man he'd never met would soon bring an end to his life. Bryant appeared at Tychon's doorstep, pretending to need something. When the door opened, Bryant shot him point blank in the chest. Tychon crumpled instantly, his life extinguished in a matter of seconds. But Bryant didn't leave it at that. After committing the murder, Bryant wandered through Tychon's home, unbothered, and then, in a grotesque act of cruelty, used Tychon's own blood to write a message on the wall. Victim number 4 in 2 weeks. Catch me if you can. He didn't seem to care that his actions were being etched into history. He didn't care about the terror he was creating, not just in Tychon's family, but in the community itself. As Bryant left the scene, he picked up the phone and called Tychon's wife and daughter, pretending to be Tychon. He spoke casually, telling them that their loved one was dead, taunting them as they realized they would never hear his voice again. On October 13th, just days after he murdered Tiachon, Bryant's spree continued. This time, Christopher Burgess, a 29-year-old man, would become his final victim. Unlike the first two, Burgess had no connection to Bryant. He was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. He was walking out of a convenience store when Bryant approached him and shot him twice in the back. The killing was quick and senseless. Bryant showed no remorse. He didn't care about the man's life. He simply took it, then walked away, leaving Burgess to die in the parking lot, a random casualty in a spree that seemed to have no rhyme or reason. It wasn't just the murders themselves that haunted this case. It was the coldness that came with them, the indifference that Bryant showed toward his victims, the lack of humanity in his actions. After murdering Willard Tiachon, Bryant didn't just walk away from the crime scene. He left behind a chilling message in Tiachon's blood. Victim number 4 in 2 weeks. Catch me if you can. Bryant's message was taunting, almost playful in its malevolence. It was as if he was daring the authorities to catch him, relishing in the fear and confusion he had sown. But the message was more than just a taunt to the police. It was a reflection of Bryant's cold detachment from the murders he had committed. It was a signature, a mark of his arrogance, and a clear sign that he was savoring the terror he was spreading. The community of Sumter was in shock. 3 murders in the span of just a few days, each more brutal and senseless than the last. Law enforcement quickly connected the dots between the murders. Each victim had been shot in similar fashion, and each crime bore the marks of a troubled, dangerous man. Bryant's name had already come up in the investigation, but it wasn't until October 14th, 2004, just 5 days after the last murder, that police were able to arrest him. He was found hiding out at his girlfriend's house. When investigators questioned him, Bryant confessed to the murders without hesitation. He told them exactly what he had done, describing the violence in cold, emotionless detail. His lack of remorse was chilling, and his indifference to the lives he had taken left investigators with a deep sense of unease. Bryant's case became a symbol of the complexities surrounding the death penalty. While many believed he deserved to die for his horrific crimes, his defense team argued that his violent upbringing, history of drug abuse, and mental health issues should be taken into account. They claimed that Bryant had suffered years of abuse as a child, and that his troubled history had driven him to commit the crimes he did. But despite these arguments, the courts remained firm. In 2008, Bryant was convicted and sentenced to death for his brutal killings. For the next 17 years, his legal team filed appeal after appeal, hoping to have his sentence overturned. They argued that his history of trauma and mental illness should have been considered in his sentencing, but these appeals were ultimately rejected. As Bryant sat on death row, his case became a flashpoint for debates on the fairness of the death penalty. Could a man who had suffered so much in his life be held fully accountable for the 3 murders he had committed? Or was he simply a cold-blooded killer who had no right to continue living? The questions continued to linger for years, and as each appeal was denied, Bryant's fate seemed more and more certain. On November 14th, 2025, after 2 decades of legal battles, Bryant was finally executed. His execution took place at Broad River Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina, and was carried out by a firing squad. At 6:05 p.m., the shots rang out, and by 6:10 p.m., Bryant was pronounced dead. For his final meal, Bryant chose spicy mixed seafood stir-fry, fried fish over rice, egg rolls, stuffed shrimp, 2 candy bars, German chocolate cake, and 2 Pepsi. Despite the indulgence, Bryant showed no emotion, and when asked if he had any final words, he simply remained silent. His execution marked the end of a violent spree that had plagued South Carolina for over 2 decades, but the moral questions surrounding his death would continue to haunt those who had followed his case. What do you think about the execution of Stephen Bryant? Do you believe his troubled background and mental health played a role in his actions, or was he simply a cold-blooded killer who needed to face justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more detailed coverage of high-profile true crime cases like this one. Imagine walking into a quiet, unassuming convenience store to pick up a few groceries, only to find that the person behind the counter is being attacked by a cold-blooded killer. That's exactly what happened on August 15th, 1988, when Richard Barry Randolph walked into the Handyway convenience store in Palatka, Florida. But this wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was a brutal, senseless murder that would shatter the lives of many. Randolph didn't just rob the store. He took the life of 62-year-old Minnie Ruth McCullum, a woman who had worked there for years. What led Randolph to commit such a violent act, and why did it take so long for justice to finally be served? In this case, we explore the life of a woman who was kind-hearted and just doing her job, only to be attacked in the most horrific way imaginable. We also delve into the long, painful wait for justice, as Randolph spent 37 years on death row, fighting his sentence while McCullum's family and community awaited the conclusion of his fate. This is a story of brutality, time, and ultimately the quest for justice. But was it enough? On the evening of August 15th, 1988, Richard Barry Randolph entered the Handyway convenience store in Palatka, Florida. McCullum, a friendly 62-year-old woman, was behind the counter, as she had been for years. She greeted Randolph like any other customer. But this encounter would turn into a nightmare for McCullum. What seemed like a routine robbery quickly turned into a violent and senseless act. Randolph, likely aware of the store's layout, immediately attacked McCullum, violently beating her before strangling her with a cord. As she fought for her life, Randolph then escalated his violence, stabbing her repeatedly. The brutality of the crime far beyond what anyone could have imagined. But Randolph didn't stop there. After murdering McCullum, he stole her car and a few lottery tickets from the store. It was clear that the violence had been the goal all along. A cold, calculated act devoid of any humanity. He fled the scene, leaving McCullum lying in a pool of her own blood. McCullum survived for 6 long days in a coma. The doctors tried everything they could, but she would eventually succumb to her injuries. The pain of knowing that she fought for life while the community was left helpless added to the grief her family experienced. McCullum's family and friends were devastated by the brutality of her murder. She had been a staple in the community, kind-hearted, always ready with a smile and a conversation. No one could understand why anyone would want to harm her. What had driven Randolph to such an act of violence? Was this a crime of opportunity, or was there something more sinister at play? The investigation into McCullum's murder began almost immediately. Law enforcement quickly discovered the nature of the crime, a brutal robbery and murder. But what they didn't know yet was the identity of the killer. However, Randolph's knowledge of the store and his familiarity with the area soon pointed investigators in his direction. The turning point in the investigation came when Randolph attempted to cash in some of the stolen lottery tickets. This mistake would be his undoing. The store's security system and the unique nature of the lottery tickets quickly led authorities to Randolph. Randolph was arrested shortly after trying to redeem the stolen tickets. When investigators questioned him, he confessed to the crime, detailing how he had planned the robbery and how the murder had escalated. The coldness of his confession sent chills down the investigators' spines. What struck investigators as most chilling was Randolph's lack of remorse. His confession was methodical, as if he were recounting a series of events that didn't concern him emotionally. This would become a theme throughout his legal journey, his emotional detachment from the brutal acts he had committed. In 1989, Randolph was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But what followed was an endless series of appeals. His defense team argued that his violent tendencies could be traced back to a history of childhood abuse and mental health struggles. They questioned whether Randolph's actions had been a result of his environment and upbringing, or if his violent outbursts were simply signs of a disturbed mind. As the years passed, Randolph's case became a symbol of the complexity of capital punishment in America. His legal team fought relentlessly, citing his troubled upbringing and mental health issues as mitigating factors that should have been considered in his sentencing. But despite numerous appeals and legal delays, the courts stood firm. Randolph's crime was too brutal to be ignored. For 37 long years, McCollum's family had to endure the frustration of seeing Randolph delay his execution, each new appeal postponing any sense of closure. As the years went by, Randolph's case sparked debates about the fairness of the death penalty and whether it was right to execute someone who'd suffered so much in his early life. But for the family of Minnie Ruth McCollum, these years of delay only added to their grief. On November 20th, 2025, after nearly 4 decades of waiting, Richard Barry Randolph was executed at Florida State Prison in Stark, Florida. His execution by lethal injection marked the end of a long and controversial journey for justice. Randolph's final meal was a simple cheeseburger, fries, and ice cream, a stark contrast to the brutal violence he had inflicted on his victim all those years ago. When asked if he had any final words, Randolph remained silent. It was as though he had become numb to the consequences of his actions, a silent, chilling acknowledgement of the crime he had committed. At 6:02 p.m., the lethal injection was administered, and by 6:12 p.m., Randolph was pronounced dead. His execution brought closure to McCollum's family, but it also raised the same old questions about justice, punishment, and the role of mental health in criminal behavior. Was Randolph's execution a necessary step for justice, or was it too harsh a punishment for someone with such a tragic past? Did his troubled upbringing explain his actions, or was the brutality of his crime too much to overlook? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that explore the complexities of justice, punishment, and the death penalty. As we reach the end of these 3 stories, it's impossible not to reflect on the larger issues that each case brings to the forefront. These aren't just stories about murders and executions. They are powerful examples of the moral, legal, and emotional challenges that accompany the death penalty. For Bryan Frederick Jennings, Corey Bryant, and Richard Barry Randolph, justice was delayed for years, even decades. Jennings spent 46 years on death row, Bryant spent 21 years, and Randolph spent 37 years. These long delays in execution raise questions that are difficult to ignore. What does justice look like when decades pass between a crime and its punishment? Is it fair to have victims' families wait for so long, with the process of justice seemingly dragging on endlessly? And does the death penalty truly serve justice when it takes so long to carry out? These questions are not just academic. They are felt deeply by those who have lived through these long waits, those who have seen lives lost, and those who have suffered the consequences of these delays. But perhaps the most profound question raised by these cases is whether the death penalty in itself is a fair and just punishment. The morality of taking a life in the name of justice is a debate that spans generations, with strong arguments on both sides. Is the death penalty a deterrent, or is it an outdated practice that does more harm than good? Does it offer closure for victims' families, or does it merely prolong the pain? In each of these cases, we saw victims whose lives were senselessly taken, and families left to grapple with the aftermath. But we also saw defendants who, after committing horrific crimes, faced long years of legal battles and appeals. For some, their troubled pasts and mental health struggles were seen as mitigating factors, but in the end, their actions led to death. Was the ultimate penalty truly the answer, or was it simply a reflection of a flawed system? The long delays in justice, the years spent in prison, fighting appeals, certainly complicate the idea of justice. Is justice truly served when an execution comes so many years after the crime? Or does this delay diminish the meaning of the punishment, rendering it less about justice and more about bureaucratic red tape? In the end, the question of whether justice was truly served remains open for interpretation. These three men's executions were a grim reminder of the flaws in the justice system. Whether it is the years spent on death row, the unanswered questions surrounding mental health, or the broader debate over the morality of the death penalty itself, these cases force us to confront the uncomfortable reality of how justice is dispensed. Now, we turn the question over to you. Were these executions fair? Did they deliver the justice that was deserved? Or did the long delays and flaws in the system ultimately undermine the very idea of justice? Should the death penalty still be a part of our justice system, or is it time to reconsider this form of punishment? We want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your opinion on the death penalty and whether these executions were a just conclusion for each case. And if you found this documentary insightful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth documentaries that explore the real lives and difficult decisions affected by the justice system. Let's continue the conversation. This is Fatal Verdict. Thank you for watching. And remember, these are not just stories. These are real people, real victims, and real consequences. Until next time, keep living your best life.